Okay, so tonight we are doing our second week of Colossians. Now remember, last week we did our first steps, and we kind of did the introduction, Paul's thanksgiving, the introduction to Colossians, the most important passages in the Bible, specifically in the New Testament, and most assuredly in the letters, that talks about Jesus. Well, in the whole New Testament about Jesus? Well, of course it is. But as I said last week, Colossians, of the letters, Colossians is the most Christocentric letter that we have. It elevates Christ more than any of the other letters. Now, that's not to say the other letters put him down, but it's just so focused. Now, remember, we talked about last week the Colossian heresy, and we're going to talk about that a lot more. Put Christ back at, in our lives, right? Do I make Jesus supreme ruler over my life every single day? I'm a pastor, of course I do. I ever struggle with this? I get to stand up and preach to everybody else about that. No. This is something that we all struggle with. And if we don't have other voices like the Colossians had in their ears trying to pull us away from what we've been taught, the gospel, then we are truly fooling ourselves. So, tonight, the overall title is The Fullness of God. So, and y'all, this is a jam-packed, I'm hoping we're going to get through all this. We're not going to bulldoze it, but you could spend probably a couple weeks just on the first 6 verses here tonight. And we're not going to do that, but the fullness of God is where we're starting with. But here's the question, the first question. Savior? Other things?
Messiah.
Lord. Redeemer. Teacher. Friend. Forgiver. Sustainer. I'm really glad you said that, Michelle, because part of the Colossian heresy that we talked about last week was this transcendent ascetic philosophy. All right, transcendent. They wanted to transcend. All right, there's these spiritual powers that are fighting, and we need to transcend this mundane world. But also ascetic, very, very rigid laws. You have to follow these laws to get the righteousness, which we know that that's not a good thing. So transcendent ascetic, they're like, this body, this physical stuff is not good. But one of the things that we're going to see specifically tonight is Jesus was physical. He was a physical body. And that was something that was really hard. How is something from this earth going to defeat spiritual powers? Well, and one of the commentaries said, the Colossians were just like all the other people of their day. They were struggling with these spiritual powers that were overpowering them. And nobody in our world ever talks about any of those things except the golf gods, or the basketball gods, or the football, or the baseball god. Y'all, we say that all the time. A golfer standing over a 3-foot putt to win a tournament, and it goes all the way around and then ends up not going in. Oh, he made the golf gods mad. We walk around in our world and we still struggle with these I don't know. Do I have to appease God? If something bad happens to me, maybe I didn't pray enough. These are some things that still sneak into our world. And Paul, in this section, wants to elevate Christ. The supremacy of Christ. So let's go ahead and jump on in. I started to get ready to tell something, but I'll come back to that. All right. If you have your Bibles, we're in Colossians 1, and right now we've got verses 15 through 20. And this is a Christian hymn, and we're going to talk about what are the features of that. But this is a Christian hymn that has been inserted into the letter, probably by Paul, but possibly by Timothy or whomever. But just like preachers, sometimes they bring in some lyrics from a song to make their point. That's exactly what is happening here. We'll kind of break that down. But when you want to, who is Jesus? This right here is the cream of the crop. So listen as I read all of this to us tonight. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. He himself is before all things, and in him all things hold together. He is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. Let that sink in for a minute. Now, I'm telling you, we could spend more than 3 weeks. We could probably spend 8, 10, 13 weeks just on this. Let this sink in for just a minute. Is there anything that just pops out to you that you're like, wow? Things that you see that are repetitive. Things that speak loudly to you as you just grasp it in this just 2 minutes right here. He is first. Where do you see it? Firstborn. He. I mean, it does say the church here, but it's still talking all about Jesus. Isn't that weird in the letter? Especially how personal it was right before that, because verse 14, in whom we have redemption, the forgiveness of sins. He's talking to them about their redemption and their forgiveness of sins, and then nothing about them. Okay, so it's like, doesn't a relative pronoun doesn't he need to relate to something? And he just 3:16. Now, this is another one of the Christological hymns, Philippians 2. It is a power who, being in the very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be grasped. That's why they say this is probably him. That's a him. In 1 Timothy 3:16. He was revealed in flesh, vindicated in spirit, seen by angels, proclaimed among Gentiles, believed in throughout the world, taken up in glory. Isn't that throughout the world taken up in glory? Who that'll preach? Man. But you know what that he? Go back and look at the Greek. Anybody want to take a guess? Os. Yeah. Another little snippet from another little song that they were singing way, way, way back, all the way from the beginning. So this is those are some of the pieces that the scholars say that this is different. This doesn't look like the rest of the letter. This stands out. But what's also interesting in verse 18b, if you look, he is the head of the body of the church, and then he is the beginning. Anybody want to take a guess on what he is in the beginning? What he is? Again, in that Greek, it's right. So scholars see that as the second stanza. So we got 2 verses of one of the earliest hymns about who Jesus was. Isn't that cool? I don't know. Maybe I'm just geeking out a little bit. But I love that this is, we have this history. We have this connection to this passage there. Okay? thoughts, questions here before we keep going? All right.
Do you think he was testifying?
Do we think he was testifying? So it's very possible. The only one of the other things scholars point to is a lot of these hymns use words that aren't used in other parts of the New Testament, right? Paul doesn't use these words in other places. So it is possible that it could have been him, but it seems less likely that he didn't. If he didn't use those words in any of the rest of his letters, then where did this come from?
Right.
Probably an external source of the thoughts. All right, so let's break it down a little bit more. The first stanza, the firstborn of all creation. Now we're gonna piece by piece go through this. We're not going to have time to go through every little bit and piece, but I do want us to piece this together. Look there, beginning of verse 15. He is the image of the invisible God. Piece of cake. We got it, right? What does the invisible God look like? Why didn't Jesus come when we had digital cameras? We could take a selfie with Jesus. That would be nice if we had the image. The Greek word here is, what does that sound like? Icon. Oh.
Wasn't that a camera?
Yeah, isn't that a camera? Right? Yeah, icon. And we think of icons, right? And these images. And specifically, if you go all the way back to the Old Testament, specifically the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament, we were made in the image of God. Now, isn't that interesting? Part of our creation touches back to this. Now, we are not the image of the invisible God, but we were made in the likeness, in the image. There's something like of God's likeness in us. So we've got this idea. So that's one thing that it could actually mean. But there's something else.
A lot of people kind of getting it wrong. They want to know, does God look like us? But we're supposed to look like God.
Yeah, that's a great point, Deanna. So does God look, we can make God in our own image. Does God look like us? What does God really look like? And we think he looks like us, but we are supposed to be looking like God. We're supposed to be reflecting his image, not making him in ours. Absolutely. The first thing, Dick, what was the first thing we said when I said, who is Jesus? Who is Jesus? Son of God. Do children bear the image of their parents?
Yeah, sometimes.
He looks, facial features and body type or whatever. And they would say the same thing about James, right? It's so incredible because we bear the image of our family, right? You look at, when I remember Julianne was about 3 weeks old and I was feeding her a bottle, and there's something about her eyes up that when she was taking that bottle, I was literally feeding my baby picture. And it blew my mind. Jesus, that's God's Son right there. The image of the invisible God. What if God actually came down incarnate and walked through? That's what he reminds me of. Isn't that cool? The image of the invisible God. He is so much bigger and so much greater than anything we could ever imagine. But if we could actually see him, maybe he would look like, the early church said. That's exactly what he looked like. Thoughts there?
I mean, we think it's cool now, but, you know, when Jesus was walking around, they didn't know who they were looking at.
Great point, Lolita. Yeah, so if we're like, man, that would be so amazing to have been there with him, but they didn't know. The people that were there with him didn't know.
No.
They missed it.
That's why Judas had to identify
Yeah.
for the Roman guard.
Judas had to identify him for the Roman guards, the one I kissed, or yeah, for the Jewish guards. That's right. Yeah, the one I kissed. He's the one.
Right. They would have walked right by him.
Yeah.
Does it matter?
Say it again.
Does it matter what he looks like?
Does it matter what he looks like?
Isn't
Ooh.
it about how he acts?
It,
Isn't that
oh.
Isn't that the image?
So is it what he looked like, or is it how he acted, right? And yeah, we have to be real careful because there's a lot of blue-eyed pictures of Jesus hanging in churches. I don't know many people from Palestine, but I haven't seen many people that grew up in Palestine and all their family that had blue eyes. Beautiful flowing blonde locks.
People just don't realize what Jesus looks like. They think they know what he looks like, but they don't know.
The people think they know what Jesus looks like. And we have a picture of who Jesus is, right? We make God in our image. We make Jesus and we project ourselves on that. If I'm telling you a story about this guy who, you know, he was a good dad and this sort of thing, that sort of thing, there's a certain image of person that pops in your mind.
Yeah, and then when he walks in, it blows that.
Yeah, I didn't know you were of that race.
Right, or you didn't know that he was that short or that
You're that short? Yeah. Wait, you're a Yankee? They make good of those?
Yes.
Right? You're from across the pond? No. You gotta be from North Carolina. Down south.
Right.
So I think we have to constantly remind ourselves that we have an image of God.
Yes.
We have an image of Jesus.
It'd be hard not to
It-
believe.
And we always need to remind ourselves that we need God to break into that and show us something more. He is the image of the invisible God, and He's beyond anything that we can imagine. That second phrase there, the firstborn of all creation. Dr. Percival actually translated it, Christ the firstborn over all creation. Now why? The firstborn of all creation is actually a pretty dangerous statement. When was Jesus born?
After it was created.
After the world was created.
In the beginning.
But in the-
there at creation,
But in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God.
and Jesus was there.
Jesus is the Logos.
He's the Word.
He is the Word. Now, let's jump into this. Arianism is actually a heresy that originated in 250 AD. And it's a specific heresy that had a lot of trouble accepting that Jesus was actually physically there. Okay? This was a very common philosophy was this, the fact that the physical was bad and the spiritual was good. We're trying to escape the physical to get to the spiritual, right? And if physical is bad and spiritual is good, then could Jesus be physical? No, because matter's evil. We have to escape. Goes back to that transcendent ascetic idea. Well, they took that to say Jesus isn't co-eternal with the Father. He was born after. And that was a problem. When you start reading John 1, you're like, wait, he was with God in the beginning, so he wasn't born after. So that's why Dr. Percival uses the firstborn over all creation, just to kind of help point out the fact that the Greek word prototokos indicates sovereignty of rank, not just birth order. He's the firstborn over all creation. He is supreme. Christ is supreme. We've talked about that. He's first. He's supreme. Okay? So, firstborn over all creation. Why? I mean, all right, you're first, but why'd you get the first seat at the table? Well, in him all things were created. Right there at the beginning, verse 16. Okay, that makes sense. You know, when you're like, why did you get the first seat at the table? Or and then all of a sudden they start talking and you're like, never mind. Let me see your resume. What are your qualifications? And then they start listing them off and you're like, I should not have asked that question.
So time to shut up now.
Yeah, it is time to shut up now, right? And then because then if they say, well, let me see your qualifications, right? You're like, no, I'm good. Jesus is God's agent of creation. In him, all things were created. Pope Athanasius, who is one of the popes of Alexandria in the 4th century, said this: if all the creatures were created in him, he is other than the creatures. And he is not a creature, but the creator of the creatures. Got it?
Okay.
Sure, Athanasius. I'll take your word for it. But, I mean, if you break it down, right? If he created all the creatures, he's different from the creatures. Right? He's not a creature, but the creator of the creatures. So, once again, just highlighting how supreme he is. When we leave here, when we go home tonight, tomorrow, there's a project. I want you to create a creature. It could be a cat, dog, just go, I can't build a thing, right? There's some people in here that can do some woodworking and make a creation. But I can't make any creature, right? We can't make a creature because we have to have a power beyond us. Jesus is God's agent of creation. And for in him all things in heaven and on earth were created, things visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or powers. All things have been created through him and for him. Just heaven and earth, invisible and invisible. But other than that, he's an amateur. Not much else. Yeah. All of the cosmos. Now remember, the Colossians have got this heresy going on. These people are in here preaching different things. These spiritual powers, they're too powerful for this bodily Jesus, because matter's evil and it's less than the spiritual. But everything comes into being under him. The supremacy of Christ.
Oh, he was Joseph's son after all.
Say that again?
I said he was just Joseph's son after all.
He was just Joseph's son after all. That's right. He was just a carpenter's son. Right? He's from Nazareth. Y'all, Nazareth, that was...
Andrew. No, I didn't.
No, would not be like Andrew. Are you kidding me? We would... Shiloh? Where, Andrew? We'd be Capernaum.
Good joke.
Bethlehem, right? Somewhere, we got to be somewhere in Judah.
I got a little question about your word, God's agent.
God's agent.
Because, to me anyways, an agency implies that there is a superior and an inferior.
Okay.
And if Jesus is actually the creator, and God is the creator, then it's really not an agency.
So when you're talking about agent and agency, does that create this superiority, which is you're exactly right. And this is where any conversation on Trinity or Trinitarian topics, we don't we're not really focusing on spirit in here tonight. What does that mean? God's agent, God's avenue, God's direction of. That was, and I don't remember if it was Percival that used it, or I used 3 different commentators, and they used that specific phrase for that. But what they were getting at is, with Jesus' words, I am the way and the truth and the life. He's the way that God brought this redemption. This incarnation of God was God's agent. That was God's path. That was God's way for reconciliation. I don't know if that satisfies you there, Don, or not, but
So is that the channel?
is it the channel? The door, the avenue?
Almost like a catalyst, like that.
Almost like a catalyst?
Yeah, like a chemical reaction, you put an agent, I don't know,
Oh.
I don't know. That's what it makes all of our stuff like that.
And when I do think of Trinity, I always think of this heavenly dance. Trey and I were talking about this on Sunday. In Him all things in heaven and on earth were created. That was their explanation of that. Everything was created in Him, through Him, for Him. All of those pieces. But once again, we could... You're not going to walk out of here completely No, if you walk out of here completely satisfied with this Bible study, then you have no expectations. So that's fine too. Let's keep on going here. Christ the head, sovereign over creation and church. Where does that come from? Verses 17 and 18 is actually what we're going to look at. This department, or we've all seen department chairs, department heads, and there's. But He is so supreme, and yet He holds all things together. He is so real, so present. Thoughts there? Comments?
Thomas,
Yes.
I was taught many years created by evil, and the world was created by evil, and God would not have done it.
Absolutely. That is a great point. If God is all good, okay, so the Gnostic heresy, the Gnostic philosophy is this dualistic world that we kind of referred to a little bit earlier, that spiritual is good and material is evil. So if God is all good, if God is good and all goodness dwells in God, then there's no way He can make anything physical. Right? The physical is evil. It's bad. It's wrong. And then He couldn't have actually created the world. And so, absolutely, this is maybe not full Gnostic, but it has definitely got Gnostic leanings, and there are Gnostic roots here, because Gnosticism itself was full-blown through over the last 30 years. Gnostic. It was a little bit later than this, but it's definitely that Gnostic roots of this spiritual good, physical bad. And what did God say when He created the world? It is good. That's the problem with the ascetic part of this, is that it's all bad. It's all bad. Deny. Don't know. Wait a minute. No. Don't get carried away, but you got to remember that this creation is good. All right, let's keep on going. Christ the head, the other part, and Dr. Percival uses this quote. Paul uses this metaphor to ensure that Christ receives the place of prominence. The church isn't merely, and this is specifically talking about the head of the church, the church isn't merely a group of individuals pursuing personal spirituality through mystical enlightenment, talking back to that Gnostic stuff. This mystical enlightenment. All physical is bad and all spiritual is good. I want this mystical enlightenment. The church isn't a group of individuals. Goal. And the goal is not just to learn more and pursue personal spirituality. Live it. Live? Absolutely. Let's keep on going because I'm running way behind. It's okay, Becky. Now the second stanza. Two little quotes here. One from, forgot his first name. Andrew Lincoln.
Andrew.
Abraham.
You had it earlier, so
Oh, I did?
Yeah, earlier it said
I'm
Andrew.
like, how in the world?
We've all read the book.
Christ is supreme, Christ is supreme, Christ is supreme. They all know. They've all read the commentary I read over the last week. That's a scary thought. It's become a new key. It's like, okay, first stanza, boom, let's switch it up a little. He's talked all about how he's firstborn of all creation, but did you see how the title changed? Now he's firstborn of the dead. Christ has overcome the power of death, the last enemy. Last I checked, there's no coming back from death. Not on this side. And before Christ, man. But look there, the second part of verse 18. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. He's the firstborn from the dead. He's the first one. Now others had been resurrected, but then they died again. He didn't die again. And the others that were just ascended into heaven, Elijah, well, he didn't die in the first place. He didn't come back here. So, firstborn from the dead, so that he might come to have first place in everything. There's no competition to Christ's preeminence. No competition. I don't know. Thoughts there? All right.
Well, if you read the next verse after that, it says, "For it pleased the Father that in him should all fullness dwell."
That's in him. And Dr. Gupta, who wrote the bigger commentary from Smith and Hellis, said this: based on the nature of the transcendent aesthetic philosophy, what we've been talking about, there may have been a concern that the embodied Jesus could not really do battle with the spiritual powers. Anybody want to go and fight an angel? I do not.
No.
Judging from what everybody said, the first thing that almost everybody in the Bible says, and what the angels say, do not be afraid. They must be some gnarly looking creatures. And I do not want to take a sword or anything against an angel. Because Jesus isn't enough. Whenever we hear Jesus isn't enough, I mean, the red flags go up, right? All the fullness of God was pleased to dwell. It was all there. And he's bigger. And then that second God was pleased that we talked about. God was pleased to reconcile to himself, making peace through the blood of the cross. Not through glory and power, but through weakness, humiliation, and death. God brought us back to himself, but not the way that they expected. Riding on a white horse, conquering, but by, this mockery of weakness and humiliation and death. Who wants to follow that? I think that was kind of the point. But there's a problem here too, because, and through him, God was pleased to reconcile to himself all things. It sounds like it's already done, right? Didn't he do it? Did he accomplish it? Absolutely. It is finished on the cross, right? And now all of our lives are perfect because we're living in the redeemed new kingdom of heaven.
Not yet.
No, not yet. So you're not saved.
Yes, you are.
Well, is it done or is it not?
We're sinners saved by grace.
We are saved by grace through faith. He accomplished it. He already did it. But it's not yet fulfilled. Y'all like limbo? Living in limbo? already and not, ooh, man, I hate it. But that's where we're living. He's the firstborn of the dead. Until we die, we won't fully experience it. Although we can experience little resurrections every day, can't we? God was pleased to reconcile us to himself. And I love this little quote. A present reconciliation with implications for the future. Sounds fancy. In other words, 18th. That night we will pick up in chapter 1, verses 21 through the end of chapter 2, and then we'll get through as much of chapter 2 as we want to. We'll see how that goes. So our 5-week study just turned into a 6-week study. That's all right, too.